You know, this week is a little bit of a special Shabbat, but actually, I was thinking about this just as I heard Oseh Shalom. You know, even though this is a special Shabbat, every Shabbat is special. I remember, my grandchildren in New York are being raised in a very secular, non-Jewish way. So when she was about 8 years old, she was asking us about Judaism. I remember I was driving in the car and she was in the back seat. And I said, well, in Judaism, we have a holiday every week. It's Shabbat. Every week we have a holiday. And she said, you have a holiday every week? And I said, yeah, we have a holiday every week. She said, okay, I'm going to be Jewish. She thought there were tangible gifts, not the intangible gifts we receive on Shabbat. But this is a special Shabbat with a special name. It's called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of Vision. It's the Shabbat that falls immediately before Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av is a day in Jewish history that's been filled with tragedies. There's the destruction of both temples, first by the Babylonians, then by the Romans. If that's not enough, and it would have been more than enough, there's expulsions in Europe that occurred on Tisha B'Av. The Jews were expelled from England, and the Jews were expelled later from Spain, 200 years later from Spain. And if that's not enough, World War I began on Tisha B'Av. And if that's not enough, the heroic Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were deported to concentration camps on Tisha B'Av. And that's just a few. I mean, it's really remarkable how many tragic things occurred in Jewish history on that day. So it's kind of interesting that this is called the Shabbat of Vision. The traditional rabbinic teaching about why it's called the Shabbat of Vision is based on the Haftorah that's read. It's a Haftorah from Isaiah, which starts with this vision of the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of Israel that will occur because the people were cruel, didn't understand how to be with each other, and were idolaters. And then it ends, and this is probably why most of the rabbinic world thinks that we call this the Shabbat of Vision, with a vision of the future. And here's the last lines that are sung in this Haftorah on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. I will purge away all your Drash. I will remove all your impurities. I will restore your leaders as in the days of old, your rulers as at the beginning. And afterward, you will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Zion will be delivered with justice, and her penitent ones with righteousness. So even though the beginning of the Haftorah has this vision of tragedy, the end has this vision of restoration. And that idea of restoration after tragedy befalls the Jewish people is a very common trope in lots of Jewish sources. I mean, it starts with Jacob. Jacob is wrestling with the angel, right? He wrestles all night with this person. He doesn't know what it is, And in the very end of this wrestling match, his hip gets dislocated. The angel touches his hip and dislocates it. And in the middle of that dislocation, he says, I'm not going to leave you go until you give me a blessing. And the angel gives him a blessing. The angel says, you're no longer going to be Jacob, which kind of means supplanter or the one who held on to a heel. You're now going to have a much more beautiful name. You're now going to be called Israel, the person who struggles with man and God and prevailed. So, it's interesting. When tragedy befalls us, the first thing most of us do is we become nearsighted. We look at the details of what's just happened. We wallow in the details, and we have to, because it's been such a shock to the system. But then, as this story about Jacob teaches us, you need to have farsightedness. You need to see a vision. You need to see a vision of the future, a vision of healing, and a vision that things will be not forgotten, but they'll at least be in a place that they work for us. No, there are lots of other examples other than the example of Jacob I started with about how our Jewish tradition has understood this. Um, one of the greatest tragedies in the Jewish world, which is one we don't think about very much, but it really is a remarkable tragedy, which was the destruction of the Second Temple. Judaism, as we know it, was not the way it was practiced in the Bible times or for ancient ancestors. It was practiced with a temple. And when that temple was destroyed, essentially, as Judaism was understood, it was destroyed too, because the temple was the focus of Jewish life. People made pilgrimages 3 times a year. People brought sacrifices. That was how they understood how to have access to God. And it was kind of a tangible, direct way to access God through this process of sacrifices and through these pilgrimages where you brought tithes and things to the temple to express your gratitude for your relationship with God. And Judaism could have ended right there because everything was in ashes. All of Jewish tradition, all of Jewish practice had ended that after the temple was destroyed. But some amazing rabbis envisioned a new path to holiness through the use of prayer. It was an amazing transition because if they hadn't done this, we wouldn't be here right now. We'd be somewhere else. I don't know where we'd be, but we wouldn't be singing Mi Chamocha. We wouldn't be standing for an Amidah because none of those practices really existed. The rabbis envisioned a new way where the sacrifice of the altar became the sacrifice of the heart. And that's what we really call prayer. It's a sacrifice of the heart. So actually, I think it was a big upgrade when it really comes down to it. Could you imagine driving to LAX 3 times a year, hopping on a plane to Jerusalem and making a pilgrimage 3 times a year in order to feel like you've connected with God? Beyond that, there was this hierarchical and hegemony, which was genetic around the priesthood. Now, we're all a nation of priests. We all are endowed with the ability to connect with God through prayer. So actually, even though this was a terrible tragedy, it ended up being a blessing in the long run. But sometimes it takes a long run to see the blessings. In my work as a cancer specialist, I had the privilege and the duty to accompany many people through life-threatening illness. There's really no right way or wrong way, I observe, for people to deal with the tragedy of being very sick. But the one thing I did notice is that the people who were nearsighted, who kept focusing on their illness and looking at the details of what was going wrong, suffered the most. And the people who found some very courageous, amazing way to envision a future or envision some learning they got from their illness managed to get through it in a much better way. One of the really amazing things that happened, I still can't believe this, was there wasn't one, but many people who came to me and said, Dr. Mann, having this cancer has been really bad. It's been really bad. And I wouldn't want to have it again or wish it on anyone else. But I have to say that having had it, it's really helped me rethink my relationship with my friends, my family, and the value of every day. And that, Dr. Mann, is a blessing. So even in the setting of this terrible tragedy, these patients were able to take off their readers and put on their distant vision glasses and envision a future that was brighter. So this week, the Shabbat of Chazon, the Shabbat of Vision, let's spend Shabbat thinking about what we've been nearsighted about. Maybe it's our response to some national or personal tragedy. Who knows? We all have things that we're dealing with. And I know it's not easy to be farsighted and not look at the details of what's going wrong. Sometimes we think if we study the details enough, we'll protect ourselves from having it happen again. But you know what? There's so many complications. There's so many details. We can never understand exactly why things have happened to us. I know that That was especially true with illness. People always tried to explain their illness by saying it happened to me because of this and this and this. But illness and tragedy is very common, complicated. So, the best step to seeing a better future is imagining it. If you don't imagine it, you can't create it. So that's what I think the Shabbat vision is really teaching us. Have a vision to see the world in a better place, and have hopes and create a world that would be better for everyone. I know for me, I have lots I'm hoping for. Things I like to see with foresighted vision. I hope for more peace in the world. We have so many conflicts in the world. Read the paper every day. It's if I look at all the details in the paper, I just feel sad every time I leave the breakfast table. But I hope that the world finds a place of peace. I hope my family will have health and happiness. I hope my friends will all be comfortable and find joy in their lives. And lastly, I hope that our community can be together just as it was on this special Shabbat. Hear Andy's beautiful music, have time to think about the world and who we are and how we fit into the world. And I hope that only blessings accompany you as you celebrate Shabbat through this next 24 hours and as you enter the next week. It can be a wonderful journey through life if we can just see the future with far-sighted vision. Shabbat Shalom.